Europe and the US, an alliance that cannot be overlooked in international relations. No matter which party is in power, one can be certain that the US commitment to Europe's survival is 100%. However, this was only true until 2016. Donald Trump, with his instability, gave Europe quite a scare. Now, as he is about to return to the White House in 2025, the old continent must once again urgently prepare its countermeasures. But why? Unique, unstable, even crazy. These are the adjectives one could use to describe Donald Trump and the foreign policy of a US president since 1945. Throughout his first four-year term, Trump made the world feel like it was on a roller coaster. This was because US foreign policy, during this period, almost went against everything they had tried to build since the Cold War. Let's analyze this from four aspects: power, peace, prosperity, and principles. In theory, US foreign policy is a puzzle of these four elements. Not all of them are always given equal importance. There will be times when power is the highest priority, but there will also be times when principles dominate. Starting with power, US foreign policy aims to strengthen national capacity, while also shaping the international environment according to its own wishes. Strengthening power can be military, diplomatic coercion, or intelligence operations. Under Trump, the element of power was emphasized in US foreign policy. Not only did he focus on strengthening the deterrent power of the US military, but Donald Trump also actively deployed coercive diplomatic measures. The US-China trade war is a prime example. He didn't hesitate to impose dozens of tariffs on the world's second-largest economy, even though it had close ties to the US economy. Experts estimate that Trump imposed tariffs on about $550 billion of Chinese goods. Not stopping at the economy, Trump also showed strong favor towards unilateral sanctions. He took aggressive actions against Iran due to its nuclear issue. Or with Cuba, despite the efforts of his predecessor Obama to normalize relations, Trump was ready to dismantle it and continue imposing sanctions on Havana. He even considered Cuba a state sponsor of terrorism. All of these actions were to assert the US's status as a superpower and the power that comes with that status, just as Trump declared when launching his campaign.
And we will make America great again. Thank you.
Now, let's analyze the second aspect, peace. This aspect is closely related to the power aspect we just mentioned. Peace through strength could be considered Trump's slogan in foreign policy. In other words, enhancing the deterrence capabilities of the US military is to serve the ultimate goal: ensuring peace for America.
America is fulfilling our destiny as peacemaker, but it is peace through strength.
Typically, when discussing peace in US foreign policy, people immediately think of international institutions. And if you pay close attention, almost all institutions that have survived the Cold War have US involvement. This is an effort to establish a world order in the American style through previous generations of presidents. But Donald Trump said no.
We will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization. The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
All right, we're going to sign 3 memorandums right now. The first one is withdrawal of the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
He shocked the world by pulling the US out of most major international organizations and agreements. Even with NATO, Trump demanded they double their defense spending. That's why Europe was in turmoil. We will analyze this further in the later part of the video. It's clear that Donald Trump still emphasized peace in US foreign policy, but his approach was completely different from that of his predecessors. The answer to his direction can be seen in the third aspect. With the mindset of a businessman, Trump focused heavily on America's prosperity. Therefore, Trump's foreign policy aimed at promoting free, fair, and reciprocal trade between nations. He also actively implemented protectionist trade policies for domestic goods, while encouraging American companies to bring their overseas investments back home. Let's take a look at the US-China trade war. Many US companies couldn't resist the allure of the Chinese market and invested there. However, Trump saw these business activities as detrimental to national interests, because these companies are making America's strategic rivals wealthier. Furthermore, China has been enforcing technology transfer policies and intelligence operations aimed at accessing the cutting-edge technologies that the US holds. For Trump, this is clearly not healthy business. He implemented policies to bring US companies back to operate in the homeland, or to shift to more friendly countries. At the same time, Trump ended costly wars, notably in Afghanistan. All for the economy of America. Now, let's move to the final aspect, principles. The principle in America's foreign policy essentially refers to the democratic peace theory. In this theory, America needs to work toward as many countries as possible adopting the American-style democracy. This would ensure security and prosperity for America, as democracies do not fight each other. However, Donald Trump was not a believer in this theory. He openly stated during his 2016 campaign that many of the serious issues in America's foreign policy stemmed from our dangerous belief that we could build Western-style democracies in countries with no experience or interest in those values. Throughout his term, Trump engaged with, and even negotiated with, figures that American politics often considered dictators, from Putin to Kim Jong-un. Thus, if we consider the priority levels of these aspects, we would have Trump's foreign policy as follows. With peace and principles ranked last, this serves as a wake-up call for Europe, especially since this continent has grown so accustomed to relying on America's national security guarantees. Europe should fear Trump's return more than what Russia has achieved or will achieve in Ukraine. Let's go back to Trump's first term to see the fear he instilled in European leaders. Europe was never really keen on ensuring its own security since the Cold War began. It may sound illogical, but they were reassured because of the protection offered by the giant across the Atlantic. In 1949, the US and several Western countries established the NATO military alliance. NATO has ensured the security of Europe ever since then. Take a look at this chart. This shows the amount of money the member countries contributed to NATO in 2016, 1 year before Trump took office. There's no debate about this. The US clearly spent a huge amount on Europe's security. But now, let's look at this chart from a different angle. NATO has had a principle since 2014. That is, all member countries must commit to contributing 2% of their GDP to the alliance's common defense budget. They made sure that the 2% figure was an important symbol of each member's political will in the common defense effort. Now, let's count. How many countries followed this principle in 2016? The US, the UK, Poland, Greece, and Estonia. Even European powers like Germany and France only contributed 1.2% and 1.8%, respectively. In international politics, this is a sign of freeloading. When one or a group of countries step up to cover the costs of an international institution's operations, the other countries get used to limiting their contributions. Why should I pay when someone else is taking care of it for me? Let's spend that money on other things, like economic development. And so, the US has automatically been the caretaker for Europe for 67 years, until Trump became president. Because the 45th president of the US didn't like this freeloading. As we mentioned, Trump tends to apply a business mindset to foreign policy issues. Therefore, in relations with any country, he emphasized reciprocity. The US shouldering NATO alone was clearly against his thinking. In a speech at NATO headquarters on May 25, 2017, Trump didn't hesitate to declare, 23 out of 28 member countries were not paying the amount they should to ensure their own security. This is unfair to the American people and taxpayers. It didn't stop there. In 2018, Trump again called on NATO member countries to increase defense spending to 4% of GDP. This is an astronomical figure, as it's double the 2% spending the alliance had previously set. It's even higher than the 3.57% the US spent on military operations in 2017. In reality, the main motivation for this demand was Trump's desire for allies to share the security burden in Europe with the US. Since Trump champions the America First approach, the money he spends can't just keep going to support NATO. He also has to worrying about the American citizens who voted him into the White House. And if Europe still wants to enjoy America's security protection, then they need to pay more. For Trump, ensuring Europe's security is like a bargaining deal. He even accused NATO allies of owing the US a huge amount of money, considering the years Washington spent protecting Europe. He was willing to withdraw US permanent troops from a NATO ally if that country didn't spend 2% on defense. Germany had to experience this when, in 2020, Trump withdrew 1/3 of US forces and many combat equipment from the country. The reason for this move, as Trump declared, was to punish Germany for not paying its share. Germany reacted very strongly, saying that this troop withdrawal was not in Germany's or NATO's security interest. The situation became even more serious when Defense Secretary James Mattis issued an ultimatum to NATO in February 2017. He said that the US would reconsider its commitments to the alliance if other members did not take the 2% spending target seriously. In a space highly dependent on the US like Europe, these tough actions by the US are turning the situation upside down, especially at a sensitive time when Russia is engaging in activities threatening the security of the old continent. Trump's indifference towards NATO in particular, and international organizations in general, also reveals a harsh truth that the US government is gradually becoming indifferent to the rules-based world order that it and Europe built after World War II. This is motivating countries like Russia and China to rise up and create new rules that favor them. Europe won't be able to sit idly by if the values that have brought them prosperity and stability are challenged. Trump's actions also caused deeper political division within Europe. Some politicians in France believe this is the perfect opportunity for Europe to become self-sufficient and harness its own power. Others are more fearful. The Baltic countries and Poland quickly increased defense spending. Luxembourg, Portugal, and Croatia, although they increased spending, still didn't meet the NATO target of 2%. Even Italy made a slight reduction. Meanwhile, many European leaders rushed to arrange a visit to the White House, hoping to win Trump's favor and secure a bilateral security agreement with the US. A divided Europe is certainly not a good option if the continent is still facing many security concerns, especially from Russia. More importantly, if Trump's commitment to European security weakens, Germany might proceed with rearmament. The memory of the war years with the Germans is certainly still deeply ingrained in the minds of Europeans. If Germany rearms, France and the UK will certainly not sit idly by. Europe will once again fall into chaos if it is not under the stable hegemonic environment that the US has established. The old continent must do something to ensure its survival, especially with Trump returning to the White House in 2025. Facing a critical situation, Europe has chosen its direction. That is strategic autonomy in security. Strategic autonomy in security is not a new concept for Europe. It has existed since at least 2013 and is defined as the ability for the European Union to act autonomously, or not be dependent on any other country in areas of strategic importance. Strategic autonomy in security was especially emphasized in the 2017 to 2019 period. This was seen as a way for Europe to cope with Brexit, Donald Trump, and China's tougher actions.
Wir Europäer müssen unser Schicksal wirklich in unsere eigene Hand nehmen.
In fact, over more than 10 years of implementation, this strategy has achieved several notable outcomes. In 2017, as part of regular infrastructure cooperation, PESCO was officially launched, with the aim of deepening defense cooperation among EU member states that have the capacity and desire to participate. Later that year, the European Defense Fund was established to promote defense technology research and development cooperation. Nearly €8 billion were allocated for the fund's activities from 2021 to 2027. Since 2021, the EU has launched the European Defence Fund to provide equipment, as well as defensive infrastructure for member states and partners. This fund is currently being actively utilized to assist Ukraine in its military campaign with Russia. By 2022, the EU launched its first strategic compass on national defense and security issues. The most notable aspect of this strategy is the ambition to establish a joint EU military force of 5,000 personnel, with the capability to engage in combat both inside and outside Europe. Clearly, the EU recognizes the problems it is facing and is taking decisive steps to address them. But the road ahead for this continent is not so smooth. They must overcome challenges from within, including increasing defense spending and raising funds for defense, which means reducing investments in the economy, education, or social welfare. Europeans will face the risk of higher taxes to make up for the financial losses. Protests will likely become more frequent as a result. The political landscape in Europe will be drowned in chaos. This will lead to another tragedy for the EU: internal divisions. Some countries will certainly resist increasing defense spending because it's not a priority for them. Meanwhile, countries like France or Belgium tend to support the idea of strategic autonomy and are willing to spend more on defense. No matter the situation, internal disagreements are not good for Europe, as decision-making will become more difficult. The war in Ukraine has somewhat shown Europe a painful truth. After over 7 decades, they've become too dependent on the US and aren't prepared enough for a war on the European continent. Biden's short-term popularity is nearing its end. Trump has declared that he could end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours.
Let me just put it a nicer way. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in 1 day, 24 hours.
Meanwhile, the EU is racing against time to secure its future. Before the 78-year-old businessman returns to the White House, it will be a race that requires a lot of money and unity. Thus, with Trump's return, strategic security autonomy is probably the only viable option Europe can pursue. But the dependency on the US over the past 70 years will certainly be hard to erase. It will take a long time before Europe can truly find a trump card against strong-willed US presidents like Donald Trump.